The guns have fallen silent for a moment. Across the fields of northern France, smoke drifts like ghosts over mud and wire. Somewhere in that wasteland, voices cry out, broken, pleading, "Stretcher bearer! Stretcher bearer!" They are calling for the men who risked everything, not to take life, but to save it. This is their story, the story of the stretcher bearers of the Great War. World War I, 1914 to 1918, a conflict so vast, so brutal, that it would change the face of warfare forever. More than 60 million men went to war. Over 16 million never came home. But amid the thunder of guns and the horror of modern killing machines, there were men who stood for something different: compassion. They carried no rifles, no bayonets, only stretchers, bandages, and courage beyond measure. They were called stretcher bearers, the unsung heroes of humanity's darkest hour. To understand their sacrifice, we must first understand the battlefield they walked upon. The Western Front stretched over 400 miles, from the Swiss border to the North Sea. Trenches carved into the earth, damp, filthy, alive with rats and fear. Between them lay no man's land, a landscape of shell holes, barbed wire, and death. Every inch of ground was fought for, and every battle left thousands bleeding and broken between the lines. When an attack began, stretcher bearers followed close behind the first waves of infantry. Their orders were simple: find the wounded, bring them back alive. But that mission was anything but simple. To reach the fallen, they had to crawl through machine gun fire, through shattered bodies and mud thick as quicksand. A single trip could take hours, and often it was their last. Most stretcher bearers were not doctors or trained medics. They were soldiers, men from the ranks who volunteered or were chosen for their endurance and bravery. Each team carried a stretcher weighing nearly 45 pounds, plus medical kits, food, and water. When loaded with a wounded man, that weight doubled, often carried through knee-deep mud or shellfire. One British bearer later recalled, "Each time we lifted the stretcher, we prayed the bullets would miss. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't." The Battle of the Somme, 1916. A name that became synonymous with slaughter. On the first day alone, 60,000 British soldiers were killed or wounded. Behind the waves of infantry came the stretcher bearers, stumbling through clouds of dust and smoke, listening for cries of help. They found men half buried by explosions, missing limbs, blinded by gas. Some were too injured to speak. Others begged to be left, knowing their wounds were fatal. And still the bearers went on. Private Harold Finch of the Royal Army Medical Corps wrote in his diary, "You cannot imagine what it was like. The ground moved under your feet, not with life, but with the dying. We carried them until we could not stand." They worked in pairs or small teams, often for 24 to 36 hours without rest, moving hundreds of yards under sniper fire. When shells burst nearby, they'd throw themselves over the wounded, not for protection, but out of instinct to shield a stranger. When the sun went down, the stretcher bearers' true work began. Under the eerie glow of flares, they crept into the wasteland, silent shadows moving among the dead. Sometimes their only guide was a faint voice calling from the dark. Other times there was only silence and the unbearable thought of how many still lay out there, waiting. In the words of one soldier, "The stretcher bearers were the bravest of us all. We fought because we had to. They went because they chose to." Once they reached the trenches, the wounded were taken to regimental aid posts, the first stop on a long chain of survival. Here, doctors worked shoulder to shoulder in the mud, dressing wounds, amputating limbs, and sending the living onward to casualty clearing stations. For many, the stretcher bearers were the difference between life and death. But their work didn't end when the guns fell silent. They carried bodies, buried the dead, and wrote letters home to families who would never see their sons again. The stretcher bearer's story was not unique to one battle. At Ypres, they waded through liquid mud so thick they had to drag stretchers by ropes. At Passchendaele, they slipped and sank beneath shell craters filled with rain and blood. At Gallipoli, they hauled men across rocky slopes under blazing sun and sniper fire. Everywhere the war went, so did they. Few stretcher bearers received medals or recognition. Their deeds were quiet, their bravery unrecorded. Yet among them were men of extraordinary courage. One was Private William Coltman, a British stretcher bearer who refused to carry a weapon throughout the war. He saved countless lives under fire and was awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest military honor for bravery. When asked how he did it, he simply said, because someone had to. By the end of the Great War, millions were dead and millions more wounded. But the stretcher bearers, though few in number, had carried hope through the mud and terror. Their work spoke of something rare in war: mercy. They proved that courage is not always found in the charge, but in the rescue. Not in the taking of life, but in the saving of it. Today, their names are etched on forgotten rolls, their faces hidden in faded photographs. But their legacy endures in every medic, every rescue worker, every act of selfless courage that follows. As long as we remember them, the stretcher bearers of World War I will never truly be gone. In the heart of humanity's darkest war, they carried light, they carried compassion, they carried us. This is BattleRealm, where history remembers the forgotten,